So a typical example of IP differentiation strategy has been explained to us by the two first groups. It's around a smart tooth application, which is a revolutionary solution to analyze food intake with tremendous benefits for diabetes patients. And this business model is obviously protected by IP, and the patient benefits are core in this business model. The traditional implementation of an IP differentiation strategy, which is also called value-added monopoly, is called Differentiation Center. And we will have a look at some key elements of a Differentiation Center strategy. So we will look at the principle of taxonomy, which takes its origin in the biology as a method to group living organisms in clearly identified entities. What does it mean when you apply this principle to IP rights? It's used to map own and competitors' IP rights with essential product features and associated customer benefits. And a tool which is used for this is called IP function development, or also IP requirement matrix. And this is what you can see here. Obviously, to know how to differentiate, you obviously need to know and also continuously monitor where you stand in the competitive business environment. And now looking at the relation to property rights theory and institutional economics, obviously the property right theory applies very well here, because on the first point, it is a great way of making the value of the IP portfolio visible, understandable for the stakeholders, for example. How do the IP rights give us exclusivity on key customer benefits? This tool is really clearly showing that. It is also a great tool to facilitate strategy and decision-making on how to design the IP portfolio, for example, to drop some rights which obviously do not really relate to key customer benefits, but also to identify hotspots where competition might be ahead of us, or where you see that there is potential to precede competition on key customer benefits. And thus, finally, a sustainable IP portfolio gets designed, and this secures optimally the IP property rights, which again is the core of the property right theory. Now I will hand over to my colleague.
One further aspect on this center will be the monitoring of the competitive environment. To do so, you need to do an analysis of the different product of the competition of the third party, or you need to assess if these products realize the different features or customer benefits that are important for your unique selling proposition. You can realize this using the matrix on the top left on the slide. You can add if this feature is realized or not, or if it's probably realized. And you can also analyze if there is a patent on your own IP portfolio that protects this feature or this customer benefit. From a licensing theory point of view, you will mitigate the hidden information on the products because you will do your own analysis of the products. Therefore, you will have a good competition monitoring, and it will reveal if a specific user customer benefit is realized with the product of the other. This will reduce the information asymmetries, and it will allow the assessment of the effectiveness of the IP portfolio. On these assessments will be almost free of any hidden information. Now I will leave to my colleague to speak about the property-wise theory.
Thank you. From the perspective of property rights theory, this tool is a wonderful tool of the monitoring the third-party products, so which makes it easier to detect the potential IP infringement at some early stage. So in this way, it's possible to use the rights obtained to have consistent actions against the infringements to keep the competitive advantage sustainable. And I let Pierre just to continue.
Well, let's consider now we have an IP strategy in place and we have an existing IP portfolio. Important is to assess somehow the benefits and the effect of this IP portfolio in regard to the IP strategy. So for such an analysis, it's important to define easy to understand the key performance indicators that can be used to run such an analysis. So such an assessment somehow is to be done on a regular basis, and extremely important to do such an assessment cross functions. In this case, typically we would take differentiation strategy, marketing, R&D, product management on the IP team. This assessment also important is to document such an assessment so that we can track the evolution over time, and extremely important to be able to communicate somehow the output and to explain the value of the portfolio to key stakeholders. We see here on this slide an example of the portfolio assessment that shows the patent relevance somehow towards two criteria. On the x-axis, we have the, I would say, the resource-based view with internal resources. On the y-axis, we have more a market-based view, looking at the relevance of the patent portfolio of each and every patent assets towards customers' values. Now, if we, according to the agency theory, somehow in an organization, we could say that any organization has asymmetry of information that exists typically between the principal that we could see here as the management representing the shareholders, on the agents that are the different functions we mentioned, marketing, R&D, IP. So doing such a cross-function portfolio analysis will reduce somehow the asymmetry of information. It will bring a lot of transparency in the process. And having such a structured process somehow will lead to a much more rational, fact-based decision, really avoiding possible bias that the different functions would have. Or we could easily understand that R&D, marketing, or for example, the expert, the inventor himself, they might have different views on interests. They might have different criteria to assess the value of a patent portfolio. So having key KPIs in place on following a process, documented the output, will be a very good way to give transparency and to take rational decisions. Christine will take over now.
Thank you. This slide deals with the principle of synthetic inventing and why it is useful in a differentiation center. So as a reminder, we're looking in the context of a value-added monopoly strategy or a differentiation strategy, and how this is suitable to a differentiation center and the tools that we can use to implement this from an institutional economics perspective. So one tool, of course, now synthetic inventing. What is that? It's where we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who will be using the system. And what can we say the system is? It's comprised of hardware and software. So there will be different users. We can say the users could be an installer, so somebody who will actually be putting a device in somebody. It could be the diabetic, who is the user of the app and the hardware, or an interpreter of the data. So we can put ourselves in the shoes of these different people, or we could get them to come in and synthetically invent for us. So synthetic inventing, it's the creation of IP independently from R&D efforts to shape the company's market position. So in other words, you would use a synthetic way to invent a product and to identify USPs, which would then lead to differentiation of your product in the market. So here in the top left-hand corner of the slide, you see one method where you can look at a scenario examination. You can look at activities, environments, interactions, objects, and users. And then if you put that in a swim lane illustration and you do a cognitive walkthrough where you define different processes of the users and what would be happening, you can potentially arrive at different aspects which would improve your product. You could probably file patents on that. Obtain various forms of intellectual property, not forgetting designs and trademarks and all sorts of other ways to protect the exclusivity positions. In doing this process, you would integrate the market intelligence and also the technological intelligence. And as you've probably noticed, you're going to need a few people for this. You're going to need experts. You're going to need a number of people and users. So the human resources that you would need are probably quite high. So how does this fit in with the property rights theory and the transaction costs? Property rights theory, in doing this, one could expect that you would generate some R&D and leading to intellectual property rights. So you would be able to obtain those rights, which would protect your exclusivity position. That would then ensure that the business model can't be copied by your competitors in the future, and that you can then internalize economic benefits of the business model. And that would be a good reason why synthetic inventing is a good tool to use. Looking at the transaction costs, I've already mentioned that the human resources would be quite high. So initially, in doing this procedure, using this tool, you would probably have high internal costs. But that you can probably understand that it would not be a recurring expense. So it would only happen every time you do this. And that then prevents external transaction costs from being incurred because of the use of necessary the technical features exclusified for the company. I will now hand over to my colleague, Maria.
Thank you, Christine. So regarding the link to the roadmap, IP must be included and taken into account in the very early stages of the roadmap process. This requires certain competencies and resources within the roadmap team. In addition, a certain degree of technological understanding with regards to the possibilities offered by IP must be given in order to define claims for future market position as early as possible. Under the property rights theory, creating IP in the very early stages of the roadmap process allows minimizing future transactions cost, because property rights along the own development path are established. This enables both efficient development approach and also market positioning, and also contributes reducing negative external effects for the company during the research and development process. And now Nicholas will continue with employee invention remuneration. Thank you.
So one of the intrinsic effects of the synthetic inventive is actually on the employees' motivation to participate into the process. Because during the synthetic inventive, we not only design IP to protect the USP, the unique selling proposition, but also IP which is necessary to build the company's market position. So those patents or IP in general, IP rights in general, will never be exploited, will never generate any income, direct income, let's say. And so for that, if the remuneration system of the company or the country actually is only based on the exploitation revenues of the invention, then this remuneration will be quite low for patents that are generated to build a market position for the company. So on an agency theory approach point of view, the agent here is actually the inventor, and the principals are the company, the management of the company. It could be also the IP department, or in general manner, it would be the technical project, the product for the product development. So we could be facing a problem of agenda, of hidden agenda of the inventor, because the inventor might have, if he has only a few hours to dedicate to inventions, he might dedicate this time only for the invention that will maximize his remuneration, his bonus for the invention. So the agency theory point of view will drive that we need to better define the remuneration scheme of the inventor for those type of invention, like the one that are used to build the market position, so that we can decrease this effect of the hidden agenda of the inventor, so that he can dedicate more motivation to build a strategic position for the company. So on the transaction cost point of view, there will be an effect because we are increasing the remuneration scheme for this type of inventions. So of course there will be incurred internal costs for that. But on the other way, we are increasing the number of IP rights designed to build up a good market position. So actually the external transaction costs will decrease. So altogether, there's a benefit to do that. So that's the point for the employees' invention remuneration. Thank you.